Shy gentlemen, let's seek new tips. Today we are going to discuss a very important and sensitive topic. 5 ways of having sex that will make a woman ask you to stop. This topic may feel uncomfortable, but it is very important to understand. Intimacy is not limited to the physical body. It is a combination of emotional safety, trust, communication, and respect. When these aspects are ignored, sex and intimacy become nothing more than pressure, discomfort, and stress. A woman asking to stop is not a random reaction. It is a clear signal that her boundaries or emotional comfort have been ignored. In this speech, we will explain these 5 negative ways that not only make the physical experience uncomfortable, but also damage the relationship and emotional bond. Ignoring a woman's comfort and emotional readiness is perhaps the most damaging factor when it comes to intimacy. This is not just a momentary lapse in judgment or carelessness. It is a pattern that has far-reaching consequences for emotional health, trust, and long-term relationship satisfaction. When intimacy begins without ensuring that a woman feels emotionally safe, and why intimacy fails without awareness. Ready, it immediately triggers defensive responses in her mind and body. Even if there is no physical harm, the psychological impact can be profound. The human brain is wired to associate physical closeness with emotional safety. When that safety is absent, the experience becomes stressful, uncomfortable, and in many cases, traumatic. A woman may feel cornered, pressured, or unheard, and asking to stop is her natural response to regain control over her personal boundaries. This reaction is protective, not confrontational. It signals that something fundamental is missing in the interaction, mutual understanding, empathy, and respect. When her emotional readiness is ignored repeatedly, the cumulative effect can be severe. She may begin to internalize feelings of frustration, resentment, or fear. These feelings do not stay confined to the bedroom. They spill over into the overall emotional dynamics of the relationship. Trust, which is essential for any intimate connection, begins to erode. She may start questioning her partner's respect for her, her value in the relationship, or even her own voice and agency. Over time, this diminishes not only her desire for intimacy, but also her willingness to emotionally engage in the relationship. Emotional withdrawal can manifest as reduced communication, detachment, and even a general sense of dissatisfaction in the partnership. What begins as a simple moment of ignored consent can escalate into a pattern where intimacy becomes associated with discomfort, stress, and a lack of safety. This is further compounded by the fact that women are often socialized to prioritize their partner's needs over their own. Many women may not immediately voice discomfort or refusal, attempting to comply in order to avoid emotional boundaries in relationships, conflict, or emotional tension. However, this suppression of feelings only amplifies the negative impact internally. The mind and body are still registering the stress and emotional discomfort, which can eventually lead to long-term psychological strain. Chronic exposure to situations where emotional readiness is ignored may lead to anxiety, mistrust, and even avoidance of intimacy altogether. In extreme cases, the woman may feel that her boundaries are routinely disregarded, and this can create deep emotional scars that are difficult to repair. Preventing these outcomes requires active attention, empathy, and communication. Emotional readiness cannot be assumed. It must be confirmed. A simple pause, a question, or an awareness of nonverbal cues can make the difference between a mutually satisfying experience and a harmful one. When a partner listens, respects boundaries, and prioritizes emotional comfort, it not only prevents harm, but also builds trust, closeness, and authentic desire. In short, ignoring comfort and readiness is not a minor mistake. It is a direct threat to emotional health, relationship quality, and the longevity of intimacy. Respecting a woman's emotional space is the foundation on which meaningful, safe, and fulfilling intimacy is built. When communication breaks down during intimacy, the consequences can be profound, both emotionally and psychologically. Many men assume that physical cues or a lack of verbal objection automatically signal consent or comfort. But this is a dangerous misconception. Intimacy is a two-way process that relies on active awareness, sensitivity, and ongoing consent. When these elements are missing, what should be a shared moment of connection can quickly transform into an experience of stress, fear, or resentment. Women are highly attuned to emotional cues and even subtle signs of discomfort, hesitation, silence, fidgeting, or withdrawal can indicate that the interaction is not entirely consensual or emotionally safe. Ignoring the role of communication, these signals does not merely create temporary discomfort. It begins to erode trust, which is the foundation of a healthy and fulfilling sexual relationship. Psychologically, when a woman's verbal or nonverbal indications of discomfort are ignored, her brain begins to associate intimacy with negative experiences rather than pleasure or connection. This association is reinforced over time, creating a mental pattern in which sex triggers anxiety, tension, or emotional exhaustion. Even if the act itself is physically safe, the emotional and cognitive impact is significant. She may start anticipating pressure or lack of attentiveness in future encounters, which leads to decreased desire and a natural avoidance of intimacy. This is not a reflection of diminished love or attraction. It is a protective response to repeated neglect of emotional communication. The lack of communication during intimacy also impairs the ability to build emotional closeness. Intimacy is not solely about physical contact. It is about connection, empathy, and mutual understanding. When one partner does not communicate effectively or fails to respond to signs of discomfort, it signals to the other that their feelings, preferences, and boundaries are not valued. Over time, this leads to emotional withdrawal. A woman who feels ignored or misunderstood may begin to disengage not only from sexual activity, but also from everyday emotional interactions, weakening the overall bond in the relationship. The connection that once brought satisfaction and closeness is replaced by a sense of distance, frustration, and unmet needs. Furthermore, poor communication can cause long-term stress and impact mental health. Emotional distress related to intimacy can manifest in anxiety, irritability, or a feeling of helplessness, especially if repeated incidents occur. When her concerns are dismissed or misunderstood, understanding comfort and consent, she may internalize blame or feel guilt for asking for boundaries to be respected. This compounds the negative impact, creating a cycle where emotional pain becomes linked with sexual activity, leading to chronic avoidance and relational tension. In addition, the absence of clear communication reinforces self-centered behavior in the relationship. If one partner proceeds without checking for feedback or fails to ask questions about comfort and readiness, it communicates that the other person's experience is secondary. This imbalance fosters resentment and erodes mutual respect, which are critical for sustaining intimacy and trust. Over time, what might have been a healthy sexual relationship deteriorates into mechanical or disconnected encounters, leaving both partners dissatisfied. In summary, poor communication during intimacy has far-reaching consequences. It transforms an experience meant for connection into one of emotional stress and psychological discomfort. It erodes trust, damages the emotional bond, and can create long-term avoidance behaviors. Recognizing and responding to verbal and nonverbal signals is not optional. It is essential for maintaining a safe, respectful, and emotionally fulfilling relationship. Acknowledging the importance of communication ensures that intimacy remains a source of closeness and pleasure rather than stress and withdrawal. When intimacy becomes driven primarily by one partner's desires, ignoring the feelings, comfort, and boundaries of the other, it can have profound and lasting negative consequences. This self-centered approach is one of the most damaging patterns in a relationship because it undermines the very foundation of mutual trust and respect. Emotional harm is almost inevitable when one partner prioritizes personal satisfaction over the shared experience of connection. A woman may initially tolerate such behavior out of patience or fear of conflict, but repeated experiences of being disregarded eventually lead to common relationship mistakes. complete withdrawal of emotional and physical engagement. What begins as a momentary act of insensitivity can gradually erode intimacy, trust, and the willingness to be vulnerable with a partner. Self-focused behavior communicates, even unintentionally, that the other person's comfort, needs, and emotional well-being are secondary. Over time, this perception builds a psychological barrier. The woman begins to associate intimacy with discomfort, neglect, or lack of consideration. Rather than experiencing closeness and mutual enjoyment, intimacy becomes a space of tension, stress, and even fear. Emotional withdrawal is a natural response to this dynamic, as the mind instinctively protects itself from repeated exposure to experiences that feel disrespectful or unsafe. The cumulative effect is a decrease in desire, enthusiasm, and engagement, which can significantly affect the overall health of the relationship. Another critical aspect of self-centered behavior is its impact on respect. Respect is one of the pillars of any healthy relationship. And when one partner consistently disregards the other's feelings during intimate moments, respect erodes quietly but steadily. Once respect is lost, it is difficult to regain. The woman may feel that her boundaries are inconsequential, her voice is unheard, and her identity is reduced to serving the desires of her partner. This emotional imbalance creates resentment, bitterness, and a sense of being undervalued, which are all destructive to long-term connection and emotional intimacy. Furthermore, this behavior can create long-term psychological stress, feeling ignored, undervalued, or unimportant during building trust and emotional safety. Intimate moments can lead to anxiety, low self-esteem, and emotional fatigue. Over time, these negative emotions may spill over into other areas of life, affecting mood, social interactions, and overall well-being. The relationship itself may start to feel like an obligation or source of stress rather than a source of support and fulfillment. In addition, self-focused behavior often leads to a breakdown in communication. When one partner feels their needs are consistently ignored, they may stop expressing concerns or desires altogether. Silence replaces dialogue, which only intensifies emotional distance and prevents issues from being resolved. Without open communication, negative patterns persist and compound, making it increasingly difficult to rebuild trust or restore intimacy. Ultimately, when intimacy becomes one-sided and disrespectful, the consequences extend far beyond the bedroom. Emotional withdrawal, loss of trust, psychological stress, and diminished respect all contribute to a weakened relationship foundation. Recognizing and addressing self-centered behavior is not optional. It is essential for preserving emotional connection, mutual respect, and the long-term health of the relationship. Without this awareness, desire does not disappear randomly. It is a predictable response to repeated neglect, disrespect, and emotional harm. Remember, this intimacy is not just a physical act. It is a reflection of trust, respect, and emotional connection. When one partner ignores boundaries, dismisses comfort, or focuses only on personal desire, the natural response is final message and takeaway. Withdrawal, discomfort, and eventually emotional distance. A woman asking to stop is not a rejection of love. It is a warning, a clear signal that something fundamental in the relationship has been compromised. If these patterns are ignored, the consequences are unavoidable. Emotional harm accumulates, trust erodes, communication breaks down, and desire fades. What could have been a source of closeness becomes a source of stress. Relationships that fail to address these issues often drift into avoidance, resentment, and long-term dissatisfaction. The key is awareness, empathy, and responsibility. Listen, observe, respect, prioritize your partner's comfort and emotional safety as much as your own desires. Because when emotional respect is restored, intimacy can return, not as a duty, not as a routine, but as a genuine mutual experience of connection and trust. Failing to act is not harmless. Ignoring these warnings only deepens the damage. Take this message seriously. Healthy intimacy thrives on respect and understanding, not control, and self-interest. Without it, the relationship cannot survive as a place of safety, love, or closeness. The choice is yours. Enjoy your life's memorably moments. Meet again tomorrow with new tips.